Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world where velvet and marble matter less than whispers in candlelit corridors, where a single glance across a banquet table can change the course of dynasties, and where seduction itself isn't just a game, but a weapon sharp enough to draw blood. You're standing in a Renaissance palace, frescoes stretching above your head, chandeliers trembling with wax-dripped light, and the air so thick with incense and roasted meats that you can almost taste ambition on your tongue. You think you're safe, just another guest in Florence or Ferrara. But here's the truth, you probably won't survive this court. Not because of swords or poison goblets, though those are never far away, but because survival here depends on a skill modern life rarely teaches. The art of making someone fall in love with you before they decide to kill you. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love knowing who else is wide awake when history is at its strangest. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice about Italian courts in the 15th century is that they hum like beehives, buzzing not just with politics and trade, but with secrets you can feel thrumming underfoot. You trudge across marble floors, every footstep echoing off arches while tapestries swish faintly in drafty corridors. Courtiers in indigo and russet silks bow stiffly, but their eyes flicker sideways, measuring you the way merchants weigh coin. And then you realize everyone here is calculating, not just with money or armies, but with bodies. Michel Foucault, centuries later, would argue that sexuality has always been about power, and you can feel it pressing down on you like a velvet glove, gentle, heavy, inescapable. Seduction isn't a diversion, it's survival. One authentic tale from Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings fits perfectly here. Isabella d'Este, the Marchioness of Mantua, famed for her wit and fashion, used her allure to keep powerful men dangling, offering affection one day and cool dismissal the next. It wasn't cruelty, it was strategy. In a world where alliances shifted faster than banners in the wind, her teasing control over desire bought her more stability than armies could. Historians still argue whether Isabella was a manipulator of men or simply playing the only game available to her. But what's undeniable is that she thrived in courts where others perished. And here's a quirky tidbit to make you smirk. Renaissance handbooks of courtesy actually advised noblewomen on how to sit with just enough ankle showing to convey availability without tipping into scandal. Imagine a whole political negotiation balanced on the glimpse of a silk stocking under candlelight. It sounds absurd, but when you see men leaning forward, straining for every detail, you realize absurdity is often the truest mirror of power. Now picture yourself at one of those banquets. The long wooden table groans with pheasants and gilded sugar sculptures, but what really matters isn't the feast, it's the eyes darting across it. A duchess lifts her goblet, her rings glinting, and the duke beside her stiffens because he knows the man across the room just smiled at her. Every gesture is loaded, every laugh rehearsed, every fan flutter hiding a sentence more dangerous than any dagger. And as you shift in your seat, you wonder how long you'd last here, a stranger without the shield of practiced seduction. The Kama Sutra, though far removed in time and geography, insists that desire is an art, with gestures, pauses, and silences just as important as touch. You feel the echo of that lesson in these courts, where even silence is a declaration. A woman looking down at her lap isn't shy. She's choosing not to give away her gaze too soon. A man adjusting his cloak isn't cold. He's showing off embroidery that whispers wealth and virility. You laugh quietly to yourself, realizing it's not so different from modern dating apps. Except here, the swipe right is a brush of fingertips under a table, and the consequence isn't just rejection, it's exile or death. Historians still argue whether these courts were uniquely dangerous or simply exaggerated by chroniclers eager for scandal. Maybe the truth is both. Gossip makes everything larger, but real people really did stake their survival on seduction. After all, what else explains the endless trail of letters, poems, and even painted portraits exchanged like love tokens and contracts rolled into one? And yet, as you breathe in that heady mix of wax, wine, and perfume, you know one thing for sure. The Renaissance court was a theater, and seduction wasn't the play's subplot, it was its main stage. The music swells in the gallery, lutes and viols twining melodies that sound sweet but hide tension. Someone laughs too loudly, someone else whispers too softly, and you're caught in the middle, realizing this is less a dinner and more a battlefield without armor. Except maybe, just maybe, the silk gown and sly smile of a courtesan are sharper weapons than any sword. The banquet smoke fades into memory, but the court around you never sleeps. And as you wander deeper into its labyrinthine halls, you discover that the true rulers here are not always dukes with their scepters or cardinals with their rings, but the courtesans, who glide between them with sly smiles and jeweled fans. You pause in a long gallery painted with mythological frescoes, gods chasing nymphs, satyrs tugging at veils, and realize the art on the walls is only a mirror of the art unfolding in the room. Courtesans in saffron and teal gowns laugh lightly, their voices carrying over the clink of goblets, while dukes lean closer, feigning interest in philosophy when everyone knows what they're really bargaining for is access to desire dressed in silk. One story Eleanor Herman recounts is of Veronica Franco, a Venetian courtesan whose sharp wit made her a darling of the elite. She wrote sonnets, debated scholars, and entertained princes, proving that seduction could be as much about intellect as touch. Her patrons often found themselves disarmed not by her body, but by her words, a reminder that in these courts survival required more than beauty, it demanded strategy. Historians still argue whether Franco was celebrated more for her genuine talent or whether society merely tolerated her brilliance because it came packaged in allure. But her survival in a male-dominated world is evidence enough that seduction was a weapon as effective as steel. And here's a quirky tidbit. Renaissance Italy had a genre of courtesan guidebooks, manuals listing which women were considered witty, stylish, and safe companions for wealthy men. It's the closest thing you'll find to a 16th century Yelp review, complete with commentary on conversation skills and musical ability. Imagine flipping through parchment pages, choosing your evening companion as casually as a modern diner picks a restaurant. You shake your head amused, but also slightly unnerved at how commodified desire could be, how survival itself was reduced to listings and ratings. The music in the gallery swells lutes, flutes, and the steady pulse of a tambourine, and you catch sight of a duchess leaning into a courtesan, whispering advice. Alliances weren't only vertical, from man to woman, but often horizontal, women coaching each other in the subtleties of survival, sharing secrets like recipes passed down through generations. The Kama Sutra insists that skill in conversation and gesture matters as much as physical beauty, and here you see it embodied. A courtesan tilts her head at just the right angle, eyes glinting in candlelight, and the nobleman across from her forgets the treaty he came to negotiate. You might chuckle at the absurdity, but treaties were undone this way, wars delayed, fortunes shifted on the hinge of a laugh or a touch. Imagine following Franco or one of her peers into a private chamber after the gallery emptied. The tapestries there depict saints looking piously away, but in the dim lamplight, the courtesan pours wine and speaks frankly, weaving jokes with philosophy, pulling her patron into a cocoon of intimacy that doubles as a trap. By the time the patron leaves, he is lighter in coin and heavier in dependence, his future tethered to a woman who society claimed was powerless. Michel Foucault would smile grimly at the irony. Sexuality presented as scandal, yet functioning as the bloodstream of politics. You wander back into the hall, the air cooler now, and notice the courtiers pretending to discuss art while actually tracking who lingers with whom. A glance too long, a laugh too eager, and the whispers ripple outward like stones dropped in. Water. Courtesans thrived in this atmosphere because they mastered the art of ambiguity, keeping everyone wondering where affection ended and strategy began. Historians still argue whether they were victims of exploitation or agents of their own power, but the truth feels murkier. They were both simultaneously vulnerable and untouchable, pawns and queens in the same dangerous game. And you would probably stumble here, saying too much or too little, forgetting that silence itself is a weapon. But as you watch the courtesans glide away, veils brushing marble floors, you realize their survival was not built on chance, it was built on an artistry so precise it might as well have been painted into the frescoes themselves. You drift further into the palace, away from the crowded galleries and banquet halls, and suddenly the noise thins until you hear only the whisper of fabric and the faint snap of a fan being flicked open. Here, in the quieter corners of the court, you discover that words are rarely spoken plainly. Instead, everything is coded, and seduction itself depends on a secret language built from gestures, fabrics, and colors. You watch a lady in indigo silk lift her fan just high enough to conceal her mouth, but not her eyes, and with that tiny act an entire sentence passes between her and the young poet leaning on a marble pillar. A man scratches at his beard, tilting his head to one side, and suddenly you realize he has just declared his interest without speaking a word. Historians still argue whether these gestures were formalized like rules in a handbook, or whether they were improvised games that evolved organically within the courts. But either way, they carried more weight than proclamations signed with seals. Think of it as the Renaissance version of texting under the table: silent, risky, thrilling. A courtesan described by Peter Webb in The Erotic Spirit Through History once noted how the shift from one color ribbon to another could transform a casual encounter into a promise. She told the tale of a Florentine widow who exchanged her somber black veil for a crimson-lined one on the night she intended to invite her lover into her chambers, and everyone in the room knew it. The veil wasn't just fabric. It was an announcement, almost scandalous in its boldness. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some Italian tailors stitched secret messages into the embroidery of gloves and sleeves, tiny symbols that only the initiated could read. Imagine offering a hand for a kiss, and as the lips brush the fabric, the lover notices a stitched heart or initials hidden in gold thread. That single discovery might carry the weight of a full confession. You find yourself laughing quietly, realizing that even fashion was weaponized in the chess game of seduction. The Kama Sutra emphasizes the power of paralinguistic gestures, the way a person sits, smiles, or adjusts jewelry. And here you see its wisdom echoed centuries later. A woman touching her pearls isn't restless. She's daring you to. Notice, a man resting his hand on the hilt of his dagger isn't only showing strength. He's boasting virility. The entire court seems to hum with double meanings, and if you miss them, you miss survival itself. Eleanor Herman recounts the story of a duchess in Ferrara who famously used the fan as her most potent tool. By fluttering it once, she dismissed suitors. Twice, she signaled interest. Thrice, she demanded privacy. Men who ignored her signals often found themselves disgraced at the next council meeting. Proof that ignoring seduction could be as fatal as botching a treaty. Historians still argue whether her coded system was unique to her, or whether many women practice similar silent languages. But her legend survives precisely because she outlasted rivals who underestimated her. You trail behind her in your imagination, hearing the rustle of her skirts as she sweeps down a hallway, her fan tucked under her arm like a general's sword, her eyes laughing though her lips never move. And you realize that the entire palace is a theater of signals. Candles snuffed early in a window as an invitation, a book placed upside down on a table as a warning, a flower tucked into a bodice as a declaration of intent. These aren't coincidences. They're strategies. Even silence itself becomes a sentence. Foucault might remind you that power hides not in what's spoken, but in what is withheld. And here silence reigns supreme. You picture yourself fumbling hopelessly, unsure whether to bow twice or smile once, and you know immediately that you'd be devoured in this subtle battlefield. And yet, there's beauty in it too, the grace of a fan opening, the shimmer of a ribbon in candlelight, the playful secrecy of embroidery hidden where only a lover's lips might find it. Seduction here is survival, but it is also art, written not in ink but in silk, in glances, in the delicate tremor of a hand that lingers a second too long. Picture this: the heavy doors of the Medici palace grown open, and you're ushered inside, past guards in russet tunics and gilded halberds, into a chamber where velvet curtains shut out the city and the air smells of beeswax, sweat, and anticipation. You think you're here for politics, for a treaty or alliance, but the truth quickly dawns on you. This room is less council hall and more stage for seduction, where sheets can be as binding as contracts. You probably won't survive this negotiation, because unlike the duels fought with steel, this one is fought with whispers and the warmth of a hand brushing yours across embroidered cushions. The Medici knew it better than anyone. Alliances weren't sealed only with signatures, but with bodies entwined beneath painted ceilings. One famous tale from Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings lingers here. Giovanni de' Medici, young and ambitious, was rumored to have secured loyalty from a rival family, not with bribes or threats, but by arranging a liaison between his widowed sister and a powerful Florentine noble. Whether it was true or not, the gossip itself tightened his grip on power. Historians still argue whether these bedchamber bargains were exaggerated by jealous chroniclers, or whether they were truly the lifeblood of Renaissance diplomacy, but every whispered letter and sly poem suggests the practice was real enough. And here's a quirky tidbit. In Florence, there were professional bed testers, servants paid to warm the mattress and ensure sheets were fresh before noble couples entered. Imagine sliding into linen that still held the ghost of another. Body talk about awkward. Yet even that odd ritual highlights how beds were treated as stages for history, where comfort was secondary to symbolism. You sit on the edge of a massive oak-framed bed, its canopy heavy with embroidered lily, and realize it isn't just furniture, it's a throne of sorts. The Kama Sutra speaks of the bed as the true throne of love, where rulers prove their strength as much as in battlefields, and in this chamber, that truth is palpable. A duchess adjusts her lavender gown, a prince unfastens his velvet doublet, and in their intimacy entire cities tremble, waiting for word of peace or war. You chuckle nervously, thinking of how modern treaties involve conference tables and microphones, while here a misplaced sigh could topple alliances. One night in Florence could ripple outward into decades of stability or chaos. Picture Isabella de' Medici herself, often accused by rivals of using her allure as deftly as her father used coin. Chronicles whisper that she entertained lovers, not just for pleasure but to spy, gathering secrets between silken sheets and sending them along to allies. Was she guilty? Or was her reputation a weapon wielded against her by men terrified of her freedom? Historians still argue, but either way her image survives. A woman draped in silk, eyes glittering with mischief, turning intimacy into intelligence. And you could almost see her now, leaning close in candlelight, her laughter echoing against frescoed walls, as her companion forgets his loyalty to anyone but her. The more you explore, the clearer it becomes. In Renaissance Italy, seduction was not a scandal hidden in shadows, but a currency traded in plain sight. Courtiers joked about it, poets immortalized it, painters hinted at it in allegories of Venus and Mars. And beneath the gilded ceilings of Florence, Ferrara, and Mantua, the sheets were inked with treaties no less binding than papal decrees. Foucault would argue that power always seeps into the most private spaces, and here it saturates every gesture. You lean back against the carved headboard, feeling the cool wood against your spine, and you know you're not a guest anymore. You're a pawn in the game. And perhaps that's the point. Seduction here isn't just survival for women, nor just indulgence for men. It is the invisible hand guiding the destiny of states. As you close your eyes for a moment, the sound of distant bells mingling with muffled laughter, you realize that in Renaissance Italy, survival meant learning how to turn a kiss into a contract, and a caress into a crown. The bedchamber curtains close in Florence, but the air of danger doesn't lift, it thickens, seeping into every corner of Renaissance Italy like incense masking something foul. You step into a dim corridor where the smell of rosewater mingles with the acrid tang of arsenic, and suddenly you realize that seduction here was never just satin and sighs. It was also poison, perfume, and paranoia. A kiss could be salvation, or it could be the last taste you ever knew. One of the most chilling stories Eleanor Herman recounts is of the Borgia court, where Lucretia Borgia's name became a synonym for charm laced with danger. Whether fairly or not, her reputation carried whispers that she offered goblets of sweetened wine to guests, wine that shimmered with both honey and hidden death. Historians still argue whether Lucretia herself was guilty of poisoning rivals, or whether she was scapegoated by enemies, terrified of a woman with power. But the truth that matters is how her allure was inseparable from fear. Desire and dread walked hand in hand through those gilded halls. You might laugh now, but imagine sitting across a candlelit table, watching your hostess raise a ruby-red chalice, her lips curving into a smile you can't quite trust. Would you drink? Or would you excuse yourself and risk offending her, knowing that offense in such a court could kill just as surely as the poison itself? And here's a quirky tidbit that proves how deep the paranoia ran. Noblemen often carried bezoar stones, believed to neutralize poison, hanging them from chains like holy charms. Some even dipped them theatrically into their cups before drinking, a ritual half faith, half mockery. You can almost picture the awkward tension, everyone laughing, everyone glancing sideways, wondering if the joke was covering terror. Perfume, too, became part of this dangerous dance. Oils of musk and civet weren't just sensual. Some were rumored to carry toxins strong enough to seep through the skin. Lovers might gift each other sachets of herbs or vials of scented oil, tokens of affection that doubled as tests of loyalty. Would you dare to wear what I gave you? In one tale recorded by Peter Webb, a duke's mistress supposedly wore a perfumed ribbon around her neck for weeks, claiming it carried her lover's devotion, only to collapse mysteriously one evening at a masquerade. Was it poison? Or a fainting spell inflated into legend? Historians still debate, but the fact the rumor survived longer than the woman herself shows how seduction and suspicion were woven into one fabric. The Kama Sutra insists that the pleasures of scent and touch can heighten longing, but here in Renaissance Italy, scent might also spell death. You glance again at the corridor, the torches guttering in drafts, and imagine walking past servants carrying trays of candied almonds or pitchers of wine. Each smile hides calculation, each offering feels like a test. Survival demanded not only the ability to entice, but the ability to discern, to know when a compliment was bait, when a gift concealed a trap. Michel Foucault would argue that power reveals itself most acutely in these moments, where intimacy is indistinguishable from control, and nowhere does that feel clearer than in these courts. You pause outside a chamber, hearing laughter within, but you notice the doorframe is scorched slightly, as if candles burned too close, or as if someone once tried to erase the smell of something darker. Imagine stepping inside to find courtiers raising cups, women tossing back their veils, and the air heavy with cinnamon, amber, and dread. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman's eyes linger on yours, promising warmth and maybe ruin. You probably won't survive this kind of night, because here even the softest touch carries risk. And yet, you can't look away. That was the paradox of the Renaissance court. Seduction was irresistible precisely because it was dangerous. Courtiers knew the risks, knew that a single tryst could mean riches or ruin, and still they leaned into the game, like moths to flame. And you, standing here centuries later, can still feel the heat of it, the mingled perfume of roses and arsenic, the electric knowledge that in this world, survival meant knowing when to kiss and when to kill, the poisoned perfumes and whispered. Dangers fade as the bells of midnight toll across tiled rooftops, and you find yourself drawn into the carnival streets, where seduction throws off its veil of secrecy and slips into masks, music, and moonlight. Imagine yourself in Venice during Carnival, the air alive with the clang of church bells mixed with the shrill pipes of flutes, bonfires smoldering on bridges, and figures cloaked in saffron, indigo, and russet darting like shadows through the fog rising from the canals. You probably won't survive this crowd, not because of blades, but because every mask hides both desire and deceit, and you have no idea who is whispering in your ear. One story from Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings brings this to life. A Venetian courtesan known as Bianca supposedly orchestrated trysts under the cover of Carnival, luring foreign envoys into gondolas where they thought they found passion, but left pledging loyalty to her patrons. Historians still argue whether Bianca truly wielded that much influence, or whether the legend was embroidered by her rivals. But what lingers is the image of seduction cloaked in satin masks, turning diplomacy into theater. And here's a quirky tidbit. Carnival masks were sometimes perfumed with crushed herbs to prevent fainting in the crush of bodies, but rumor held that certain perfumes were laced with aphrodisiacs. Imagine pressing close to a stranger, the scent of amber clinging to their mask, and realizing too late that your pulse quickened, not just from attraction, but from whatever potion they dabbed onto silk. The Kama Sutra praises the power of disguise and play in heightening longing, and here you see its echo centuries later. A masked figure leans close, whispering a promise, and you can't tell if it's a noble woman, a servant, or your rival. In disguise, that uncertainty is the seduction. You drift through the Piazza San Marco, its arcades lit by torches, and watch lovers disappear behind fluttering banners. Courtesans glide past, their gowns brushing cobblestones, laughing through feathered masks as though the whole city were their boudoir. Somewhere a gondola rocks gently, its lantern swaying, while inside two silhouettes blur into one against the shimmer of canal water. And you realize Carnival isn't an escape from politics, it's its purest form. Here in the anonymity of disguise, secrets are traded as easily as kisses. Michel Foucault might murmur that freedom and control collapse into one, and you feel it keenly. In masks, people reveal more than they hide. You pass a group of cardinals in crimson robes, their faces hidden by plain black masks, and you can't help but laugh softly. Men who thunder against sin by day, now seeking it eagerly by night. The contradictions are intoxicating. Scholars still argue whether Carnival was tolerated as a safety valve for repression, or whether rulers secretly used it as a cover for espionage. But in practice it was both. Love notes were slipped into gloves, rings were exchanged in the crush of dancers, and treaties were whispered behind the swirl of confetti. The music rises, tambourines, viols, drums, and you feel the rhythm pulling you in. Someone catches your hand, their mask glittering gold, and for a moment you're swallowed into the dance. You don't know their name, their family, or their intentions, only the press of their palm and the tilt of their smile beneath velvet. It is both exhilarating and terrifying, and you understand why people risked everything here. Carnival was more than celebration. It was a battlefield where survival depended not on strength, but on allure. A courtesan once joked, recorded in a Venetian letter, that she secured more contracts during Carnival than any merchant on the Rialto Bridge. Whether she exaggerated or not, the truth sparkles beneath her wit. Seduction was commerce, and masks were receipts. As the night deepens, you step into a narrow alley, the revelry muffled behind you, and the silence is heavier than any music. Two figures pressed together in shadow, their masks discarded, and you realize this is the truest face of Carnival, danger and desire knotted into one. You probably wouldn't survive long in this world of disguises, but oh, you'd never forget. It. Picture this. Dawn breaks over tiled domes and bell towers. The canals of Venice and the courtyards of Florence, still littered with wilted roses and discarded masks. Yet the echo of laughter has already been replaced by the toll of church bells, calling the city back to order. You step inside a cavernous cathedral, the incense still heavy from morning mass, sunlight spearing through stained glass and shards of ruby and emerald, and you realize that the same people who hid behind masks last night are kneeling here today, murmuring prayers as if they were saints. You probably won't survive this contradiction, because it demands you believe in both sin and sanctity at once, a trick only Renaissance Italians seemed to master. The church thundered from pulpits that passion was corruption, that lust burned souls, yet behind closed doors, bishops and cardinals indulged in the very games they condemned. One notorious story Eleanor Herman shares involves Pope Alexander VI, the infamous Borgia Pope, whose mistresses and children turned the Vatican itself into a theater of desire. Banquets were held where courtesans danced in candlelight and whispered. Rumors suggested that alliances were forged not in chapels, but in bedchambers. Historians still argue whether chroniclers exaggerated these scandals to slander him. But even the faint possibility reveals how blurred the line between piety and passion had become. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some churches actually installed confession timers, little sand hourglasses set beside the booth, because priests were known to let confessions linger a bit too long with certain attractive parishioners. Imagine kneeling in the dark, whispering sins, while the priest's silence stretches beyond piety into something heavier. It sounds absurd, but in a world where power and desire tangled like ivy and stone, it made all the sense in the world. The Kama Sutra insists that the spiritual and the sensual are not enemies but companions. And here in Renaissance Italy, that philosophy seems to have seeped into the very stones. You walk down a cloister, the marble cool under your boots, and hear monks chanting. But in the corner of your vision, you catch a young novice slipping a folded note into the hands of a widow cloaked in black. Is it scripture, or a love poem disguised as prayer? Michel Foucault would smile grimly at how institutions designed to repress sexuality often magnified it instead. And you feel it keenly in these echoing chapels where every vow of silence masks a dozen unspoken desires. You lean against a pillar, watching the faithful bow, and you can't help but laugh softly at the hypocrisy, though it's a dangerous laugh mocking the church could end in exile or worse. Yet the people themselves seem to thrive on the contradiction. Scholars still argue whether the church's constant warnings about lust were effective deterrents, or whether they simply heightened temptation, making passion the one sin everyone longed to taste. Think about it. If you were told day after day that desire was dangerous, wouldn't that make it irresistible? Imagine a duke slipping into a side chapel after Mass, meeting his lover beneath frescoes of angels. Their whispers echo under vaulted ceilings, their hands brushing where saints stare down in disapproval. And suddenly the holiest space in the city becomes the most dangerous. That was the power of contradiction. It made every kiss sharper, every glance riskier. You walk back outside, the sunlight glaring on marble steps, and the city hums with gossip. Who sat too close in the pews? Whose eyes wandered during prayers? Whose confessions might be more scandalous than their sins? You probably wouldn't survive long in this atmosphere of holy terror and hidden indulgence, because here even faith became another stage where seduction was rehearsed, condemned, and secretly practiced again. The bells fade into silence, and the streets of Florence stir with merchants opening their shutters, but your mind lingers on the paradoxes you've witnessed. Poison folded into perfume, treaties sealed in beds, sermons followed by seductions. You realize that what tied all of it together was not simply scandal or gossip, but the fact that in Renaissance Italy, seduction itself became a survival skill, when as vital as swordsmanship or bookkeeping. Imagine stepping into an artist's workshop, the air thick with linseed oil and plaster dust, where apprentices paint saints while sneaking glances at their patrons. Art wasn't only devotional, it was coated with desire. A portrait of a lady, with her hand slightly raised, might have been a commission, but it was also an invitation disguised in brushstrokes. Scholars still argue whether these symbolic gestures in art were intentional signals or merely aesthetic choices, but when you see how often eyes glisten with mischief in paintings supposedly meant to inspire piety, the debate feels almost comical. One story Eleanor Herman tells involves a duke who commissioned a fresco of Venus and Mars, locked in embrace, painted right above his council chamber. Officially, it was mythological decoration, but everyone who stepped under it knew the duke was flaunting both his mistress and his defiance of the church. It was seduction turned into stone and plaster, surviving long after the whispers died. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some artists just slipped secret portraits of lovers into crowd scenes, hiding them among saints and soldiers, a kind of Renaissance Easter egg for those in the know. Imagine walking through a chapel and realizing the angel above the altar looks suspiciously like the duchess who was rumored to have entertained the artist after hours. Even Michel Foucault would shake his head knowingly at how power seeped into brushstrokes, how even sacred spaces became arenas for desire disguised as devotion. You wander through a library next, the scent of parchment and candle wax clinging to your nose, and realize that literature too carried this legacy. Love sonnets, bawdy plays, philosophical dialogues, all fed on the same fuel of seduction. Peter Webb reminds us that erotic spirit has always found its way into high culture. And in Italy, it was practically the ink in every pen. A single sonnet could launch or ruin reputations, and clandestine letters written in invisible ink were as important as military dispatches. Historians still argue whether these texts were sincere or crafted propaganda, but sincerity hardly mattered. What mattered was survival through seduction of the mind. Even the Kama Sutra, written centuries earlier, whispers that pleasure is a form of knowledge, and in these courts knowledge was never safe unless it was wrapped in charm. You picture yourself standing at the edge of a masquerade, the flicker of torches reflecting in the canal, and realize that you've walked through a world where love was never separate from politics, where lust was never separate from power, and where every smile carried as much risk as a dagger. The legacies remain. In paintings, in poems, in the stories whispered through centuries. They tell us that to survive here, you needed to master more than swordplay or bookkeeping. You needed to master the art of being desired without being destroyed. And now, as the city grows quiet, the sun dipping low behind tiled domes, you slow your pace. The echoes of laughter, the rustle of silk, the scent of musk and roses fade into memory. You feel the weight of centuries settle softly around you, not as threat but as lullaby. The reminder that history's fiercest battles are often fought not with armies, but with glances, touches, and whispers in candlelit rooms. You exhale, letting the sharp edges of intrigue blur into something gentler, a warm haze like dusk settling on stone walls. The courtesans, the dukes, the masked dancers all dissolve into shadow, leaving only the glow of stories that refuse to die. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you realize seduction was never just about survival in Renaissance Italy. It was about leaving a mark so potent that even now, centuries later, we can still feel its pulse in art, in myth, in memory. So let yourself drift, the sounds of distant lutes softening into silence, the candles burning low, the whispers fading to nothing but breath. Here in the quiet, you are safe, and the dangerous allure of that world can rest in history while you rest. In the present, end of script. Sweet dreams.